right, well, why don't we get started? I want to thank everyone for joining us. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm the Community Outreach Librarian and Head of Technical Services for the Tewksbury, Massachusetts Public Library. I want to thank Ann Careless from the Tewksbury UK Library for organizing a whole weekend's worth of events. And thank you for including the Tewksbury, Massachusetts Public Library and the Tewksbury Historical Society. I just want to note that we're in Zoom webinar mode, so Doug and I cannot see you or hear you. If you have a question, you're going to want to type that into the chat. And if you have a question, you're going to want to type that into the Q&A box. Doug, Mr. Sears has prepared a 40-minute presentation, which he will give to you momentarily, and then we'll take approximately 15 minutes of questions or so. And again, you're going to want to type those questions into the Q&A box. We're also live on Facebook, and if anyone has questions or comments, you can type them into the comment box on Facebook. I'll make sure to address those as well at the very end of the presentation. All right, so just bear with me. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get right into it. And just so you were aware, I probably should introduce the Vice Chair of the Tewksbury, Massachusetts Historical Society, Nancy Reed, who is going to introduce Doug. Doug's remarks are pre-recorded. We wanted to make sure to get them in 40 to 45 minutes, but he will be here live for the Q&A at the end. So he will be making an appearance, folks, at the very end of the presentation. So just bear with me one moment. We'll get this all squared away and good to go here.
Welcome, everybody. I'm here to introduce the president of our Tewksbury Historical Society, Reverend Douglas Warren Sears, Juris Doctor. A graduate of Harvard College, Doug received degrees in Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School and Juris Doctor from Suffolk University Law School. Doug's home church, the first parish in Concord, Massachusetts, ordained him to Unitarian Universalist ministry. This is the same parish the Reverend Peter Bulkley served as minister from 1636 to 1659. A direct ancestor of Reverend Bulkley's long-life friend, William Hunt, whose grandson, Samuel Hunt II, history regards as the father of Tewksbury. Doug grew up in Concord and moved with his wife Suzanne to Tewksbury in 1990. Their children attended Tewksbury public schools from kindergarten through high school. Doug served 2 terms on the school committee, 3 terms on the Board of Selectmen, and 12 years as a Tewksbury Hospital trustee. Doug has served 35 years as co-minister of the Sears Chapel in Brookline and 10 years as a counselor at law in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. And we want to thank our Director of Telemedia, Brian Dorrington, and Librarian Robert Hayes, who helped make this presentation possible.
Thank you, Nancy Reed, for the introduction. Nancy has been very helpful in putting this all together, and again, to thank you for Brian Dorrington of the town's Media Services Department, and to Robert Hayes as the librarian who has been doing all the hard work and coordinating this with the good folks of Tewksbury, England, who I understand were on previously today, the 14th of November, 2021. And I want to give a shout out to them and a shout out to the folks up in Quebec, these citizens of Stoneham, Tewksbury, and a shout out to those who I guess are not joining us today, but in South Africa, in Tasmania, and in New Jersey, Tewksbury Township in New Jersey. We're happy that we're all recognizing that we exist and that we have interesting little stories that we all should tell. Today's putting 400 years of Tewksbury history into about 45 minutes, and so please forgive me if I skip some things people may feel important, and maybe a little bit hard to follow the winding road. But what I'm trying to do is to get folks to be, and this is the goal of the Tewksbury Historical Society, is to get people interested in their own stories, their own town stories. Hopefully you can find something in this talk that will be, that you can relate to and say, gee, I'd like to know more about that. And join the Historical Society or just explore this on your own, because that's what this all is all about. So the Tewksbury that we're talking about here is in Middlesex County in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Population the last census was 31,342. It's 21 square miles of land, and it has an open town meeting government similar to that which has been the norm in New England towns over time. We have and all important matters are decided by the townspeople coming to there's two town meetings really a year, and we have a board of selectmen now called Select Persons, and they're 5 in number, and we have a town manager who ensures that the will of the people gets carried out in policies. As far as people living in this town, our late society member, Gene Winter, a wonderful man who passed in 2016, found in the woods campfires which he's carbon dated that go back into as far as 5000 BC and about up until 1650 BC. So there was a Native American presence here for many, many years. Now, putting a theme to this talk, it's friendship and sports. Now, how do you say friendship and sports? Well, Tewksbury has always been known as a very friendly town. The Wamasett Indians lived up with the Concord River, which is to the north of here, northwest of here, and the Merrimack River form a boundary with the town. They lived on either side in their own praying village of Wamasett, which was established in the late 1600s by the preacher to the Indians, John Eliot. They lived over time here in great friendship with the settlers. There are a lot of Indian battles going on. We'll talk about the war of the King Philip War in 1675 to 1678, and the King William's War, which is 1688 to 1699. Largely bypassed this area, but were devastations particularly to the Native American population. But again, that didn't affect folks over here because the settlers and the Native Americans here got along pretty well. In sports, we're going to end up showing you some beautiful fields we have, and for our British friends, we even have a cricket field. We have all sorts of American sports and a great place for all of this to take place. But the sports part starts wide is actually where you got over here, because back in England, and we'll center on Reverend Peter Bulkley, 1683 to 1659 were his years. He was removed from his pulpit as the rector of Odell in Bedfordshire because he didn't follow the orders of King Charles. Now, what were the orders of King Charles and how did they affect the minister? What happened was that he rewrote or republished Charles I, something called the Book of Sports, which proscribed certain activities on Sundays. And it was required of all preachers to read from this book to their congregation. This was a time when in England that there was a power struggle between the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church, and between the Church of England and Puritans. And here, representing the Church of England, a fellow named William Laud was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was famous for his star chambers and other ways of convincing people to do what he thought the king should do. He visited Peter Bulkley on at least one occasion and said, "You're fired. You refuse to read from this book." And Bulkley said to his congregation, "Okay, we get the message." And they all sold their worldly belongings rather quickly and sailed on the Susan and Ellen ship to Boston. And included in this company was William Hunt, who was a lifelong friend. He's a couple, 20 years or so younger than Peter Bulkley, but they became friends and in Concord, Massachusetts. Now, what was Concord? Concord, we all know, were the battles of Lexington and Concord back in 1775, but Concord was the first inland settlement inland from Boston, about just 20 miles or so out of Boston. As we see in 1775, it was within days marching distance out and back for British soldiers. And they established a church, the first parish there, which still is there. I was ordained there back in 1976. He was the minister of the first parish from 1636 to 1659 and is considered the founder of Concord. William Hunt had 3 kids. Isaac stayed, the Isaac line went to Sudbury, the William line stayed in Concord, and the Samuel line, the 3rd kid, went off to the harbor up there in Salem and established a life there. He had a wharf, he was a carpenter. Court records show that he had several skirmishes with the other folks there in the community. He was looked at as a troublemaker, and a fellow named Appleton, with whom he had a struggle as to who owned what horse, ended up in charge of the militia in fighting the King Philip's War and in fighting also the King William's War. So he conscripted Samuel to fight in that, and in the King William's War, later on, his son Samuel, who we refer to as Samuel II, who we look at today as the founder of the town of Tewksbury, developed some military experience. Getting back to the story of Tewksbury, he got to know in the King William's War this fellow by the name of Waitstill Winthrop. Waitstill Winthrop was the grandson of John Winthrop, who was the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And in 1640, the Great General Court, centered in what became Cambridge, wanted to thank the Winthrops for their leadership and gave the 3rd wife of Governor Winthrop, named Margaret Winthrop, 3,000 acres of land which were out beyond Concord, out beyond the Concord and Merrimack rivers. Now, what happened in this land was that the Indians got to live there as they had done for many, many centuries. And they said no Anglo, no settler could live here. Now, in 1655, the town of Billerica, from which Tewksbury sprung, was given the opportunity to, form. And what we find in the map, which we'll put up on the board, is that Billerica was siphoned off to become other towns, became Bedford, part of Bedford in 1729, part of Wilmington in 1730, part of Carlisle in 1751. And in this map, the ancient Billerica map, which you will see, there is a funny little circle up on the left-hand side, a semicircle, and what that is the confluence of the Winthrop Grant and the grant from Billerica, the Winthrop in 1640 and Billerica in 1655. That is the area where Tewksbury becomes Tewksbury. Samuel Hunt, as we said, his dates were 1657 to 1743. Got to know this fellow, Waitstill Winthrop, the grandson of Margaret Winthrop and of Governor Winthrop, during the King William's War. And what Waitstill Winthrop inherited a third of his grandparents' legacy, basically, and 1,000 acres, which were in that particular spot where the Wamasett Indians lived in a authorized village, a praying Indian village that the missionary to the Indians in the early 1600s, John Eliot, put together and got authorized. So we had on either side of the Merrimack River, the west side was not something we're concerned with here, but that was the bigger side. Ultimately, that became Lowell. And on the eastern side, the village of Wamasett, where the Indians were living in a legal, recognized praying Indian village. What was happening was that we had the King Philip War in 1675 to 1678, which largely bypassed Billerica. It was mostly down in Plymouth, Massachusetts area, Plymouth Colony, and environs, and going out to western Massachusetts, where King Philip, known as Metacomet, his father Massasoit, was the one who welcomed the Pilgrims in 1620 to the first Thanksgiving. King the Metacomet got disillusioned with settlers and their treaties and agreements and everything. And when his John Sandeman, his advisor, who was the one who was a Native American, who was an early Harvard College graduate, was murdered, he said, "That's it." And they started a war which lasted 3 years, and which about 2,500 colonists and about at least twice that Native Americans were killed. 52 towns were attacked, dozens were destroyed, and Metacomet tried to drive the settlers back into the sea. But for the fact that he was killed by one of the Native American friends there, that may have happened. Well, I'm bringing this out because there are an awful lot of dangers there, and it contrasts this to the peaceful relations between the Native American Wamasets and the Indian and the colonists. Now, getting back to Wade Winthrop and getting back to the King William's War and getting back to Samuel Hunt II. Waitstill Winthrop, as the military leader of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, said, "It's okay for you, Samuel Hunt. I'm going to appoint you to go up and have a blockhouse." There's a picture of Samuel Hunt's blockhouse, which he built in 1689. And your job is to go up there. You're the only settler we're letting do this at this time, and we want you to patrol the river. There's a bedrock line that went across the river, which could be used to walk across, bring your horses across, and the Native Americans coming down from Canada involved in this particular war. This is a barter between the French and the English, and the English settlers had to deal with the French-inspired Indians who came down and caused a lot of grief here. So Samuel Hunt, then gradually around him, other settlers gathered. And when it got enough folks that were in the neighborhood, shall we say, it decided to take a look at separating this particular town of Wam, was already called Wamiset by the John Eliot, the missionary, making that a town. They tried to make it a town called Wamiset in 1625, and it got up to approval of the Great and General Court, but it failed to call a minister and build a meeting house, and that went by the boards. The reason why they needed a meeting house over there is because you had to go to Billerica or to Andover, and particularly as this was the town of Billerica, that's where the church was. And it was too cold in the winter, too hot in the summertime to make the trek. And this, as we said, was way up in the northernmost corner of the town of Billerica. So in 1734, a group of 41 men of the town got together and they petitioned the legislature. And the legislature responded saying, yes, you can build a public house, you can build a place for public worship. Yes, well, you can have a town. And yes, you can still pay the taxes to Billerica up until this point in time, and you'll be all set. So that's what how this came to be a town, and I then slip into that. The Puritans came over here to, they didn't like to be told what to do by a church that's run by bishops. But when they came over here, they wanted to run things their own way. And everybody had to go to church. Noses were counted. You couldn't be a stranger. Everybody had to belong to a household. And that the church, which is now the First Congregational Church in Stoneham, the First Congregational, I once served that church in Stoneham, in Tewksbury, was the center of life. It was the center of government. It was the center of church life. And you sort of had two types of government citizens. One was the minister of the church, which was Sampson Spaulding back in the day, and he served for another 60 years, like Bulkley did in Concord. And there were the sort of secular authorities of the town. So it was up until 1834, when the Massachusetts legislature said that town taxes didn't anymore go to support the minister in the town, that town taxes went to support, paid for the minister, paid for his upkeep, and the Protestant Puritan church was the law of the land. Now, we'll get to the Civil War in a moment, getting to the Revolutionary War that we talked about earlier, we have Captain John Trull, who was a farmer like everybody else. We had good soil for growing things in Tewksbury. His dates was 1737 to 1797, and he was in charge of the local militia. As they say, there were militia that to be in the militia, you had to buy your own clothes, you buy your own weapons, buy your own powder and all this. And so he was in charge of making this protective group for the town. And he's the grandson of Samuel Hunt II, and he got the word that from Woburn that the British regulars were marching out of Charlestown to come to Concord and to go over to Colonel Barrett's farm and confiscate the guns and ammunition that were there. Well, didn't get there in time for the battle at the Old North Bridge. Didn't get there in time for the battle before that at the Lexington Green. However, as the regulars were in retreat after having done battle, they came by a place called Merriam's Corner in in Concord. And at that point, Trull and his group started attacking the already rather battered British troops and taking pot shots at them along the way. So this was the contribution that Tewksbury specifically had to the Revolutionary War. Now we can see a map of 1796 moving up a little bit further. That actually it's sort of turned around a bit. On the right, actually, is where Lowell and where the Concord River and the Merrimack River come together, and we'll get to that in a minute. There's a map we have on the Lowell map of 1914, shows that once Tewksbury got developed in about the 1820s, then Lowell started, with the Merrimack River being a great source of hydroelectric power, named after this fellow Lowell, who brought in his head back how to run a mill after visiting England. That became an industrial center, and that's where the Industrial Revolution, that's where the jobs were. So people in Tewksbury had no real problem in having their land taken by the legislature to become part of Lowell. In 1834, Tewksbury had 384 acres went to Lowell. In 1874, 210, 1888, 220, and then in 1906, a total of 1,087 acres went to Lowell. Now, Tewksbury used to have, we talked about everybody has to have a place to belong. If you're old and your family had died and you were not able to keep care of yourself, Tewksbury had a poor farm. And is on the Kittredge estate, is up now where Raytheon is, up up in North Tewksbury. And that continued from the early 1800s until probably, I think, to the 1890s. Gradually, the folks in Tewksbury who couldn't keep care of themselves found a new place. I won't say they really found a new place, but in 1854, the legislature said that, well, we have too many Irish here in Boston. They are poor, they don't have jobs, they don't have health care. Let's find a place out in the country for them. And so they built the Tewksbury State Almshouse, which still is there. It's now called the Tewksbury Hospital. They dropped the name State. It's 40% Department of Mental Health and 60% Department of Public Health. And it's the largest public health hospital in the Commonwealth. Now, I want to so the people there got taken care of on the state's nickel. Just want to cover the most, I would say, significantly remembered person of the almshouse is Annie Sullivan. Annie Sullivan, whose dates are 1866 to 1936, was her parents had emigrated from Ireland. They from Feeding Hills, Massachusetts. They couldn't keep care of their kids. Annie was about 12, and brother James was about 5 or 6. And they got off the train, which would go right to the almshouse, and they were there to be taken care of. There was nearly 100% mortality rate for kids of James's age, and he died within a year. And Annie had tremendous love for her little brother, who she later, as we'll get in the story, learned to transfer to somebody else, specifically to Helen Keller, whose dates are 1880 to 1880 to 1968. Annie went to the Perkins School for the Blind, which was in South Boston. She was a smart, really smart kid, and she learned to finger spelling from a woman who was blind and deaf named Laura Bridgman. And in the center of town, we have this statue, which we have right here, by Miko Kaufman, who we'll get to in a second, a great master of public art, thankfully, in Tewksbury. This depicts the moment when Annie here fingerspells into Helen's hand the word water, and while running water over her hand from a pump, Helen links a word, fingerspell word, with a physical object for the first time. And Helen learns 600 words in the matter of months. She learns her multiplication tables, and she learns Braille. And she becomes actually the first deaf blind person to graduate from college. She was Radcliffe College class of 1900, a part of Harvard University. Another Civil War time important person is Adelbert Ames. His dates were 1835 to 1933. He was a colorful guy. He was a Mainer. He was a ship captain's son who wanted to, go in the, be a clipper ship guy. But along comes the Civil War. It's about to come along, and he enters West Point and graduates in 1861. Ultimately, he succeeds Jefferson Davis as the senator from Mississippi. You may recall what Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. He became the 27th and 30th governor of Mississippi, and in 1876 was the last Republican governor of Mississippi until 1992. He was the son-in-law of Benjamin Butler, the 33rd governor of Massachusetts, in 1883 to 1884, and he was a Republican who became a Democrat who exposed the mismanagement at the Tewksbury Almshouse. Adelbert Ames was a Congressional Medal of Honor winner for the Battle of Bull Run, and as you remember, that was early in the war, and the Confederate troops completely overran the Union troops, and that was a major wake-up call for the Union. He was the last he was a major general, and it was the last Union general, and maybe with the Confederacy as well. He died in 1933. In 1862, I add, though, Tewksbury men mustered into Company K of the 6th Regiment, Massachusetts, volunteer infantry. They had a 9-month window to be involved in the Civil War. They were down in Texas and in Louisiana. And another slide, this is how we get Ames into Tewksbury. He purchased 700 acres of land on Prospect Hill and built there in 1906, which is the same year that those 1,000-plus acres of land went to Lowell. He built a castle there, and that was just recently taken down in 2012. But I like to think of as the only Tewksbury resident ever to become senator and governor of Mississippi. Of course, his wife's dad was also a resident of Lowell, Benjamin Butler, and governor of Massachusetts, who was also a governor of Louisiana. Now, we said we had great land in Tewksbury, great growing seasons, and Harold Patton, without whom a lot of what I'm telling you now I wouldn't know, who wrote a book called Ask Now of the Days That Are Past. This was done in 1965, celebrating 200 years of Tewksbury history from 1734 to 1964. He was a forerunner of his family, 3 generations by the time he arrived, of carnation growing. Tewksbury had a rivalry with Sudbury, Massachusetts, as being the carnation capital of the world. And there are tremendous carnation plantations that were around. There's a slide here of Patton's greenhouses on North Street. And I'll just add as a parenthetically here that a lot of these greenhouses went out of business when the price of oil went up in the 1970s. You may remember under the Jimmy Carter administration, it was really you're lining up for miles to get your car filled up, and the Tewksbury greenhouses then became the foundations of a lot of the condominiums that we have now in the town, which has changed the character quite extensively. Schooling, last evening we had, you probably will see it on the Tewksbury town site, Bill Pivo wrote about the Ella Fleming School at 1503 Andover Street up in the northern part of Tewksbury. It was built in 1859 as a one-room schoolhouse. It was known as the Third District Schoolhouse. Back in the day, there were 7 districts that had single one grades, basically 1 through 8, were taught in these schools. We didn't have a high school until the Foster School in 1894, which still stands and is now condominiums. The Center High School arrived in 1935. That's now being torn down for a new elementary school to take place in Center Elementary in 2022. We have a new high school, 2012, with a picture of that. And an upper elementary school, John Ryan, built in 1999, and in 1963, the John Wynn Middle School came up and has been remodeled in 2004. I mentioned, interesting, that Tewksbury did not have until 1963 a superintendent of schools, because it had a superintendency that, of all places, was Middleton, which is up in Essex County, and Wilmington, which is our neighbor between here and Boston, and Tewksbury. Gradually, we had our own superintendency here in the community, and we got to control our own schools. I have slides here to show that the Tewksbury Almshouse we're talking about became the Tewksbury Hospital, is on 800 acres of land. And of course, couldn't use all 800 acres of land after it stopped being a farm, that self-sufficient farm to feed all of the folks that were at the institution. Result is that we have wonderful grass fields. We've got fields at the schools, and then we've got on the fields, we've got girls, particularly girls softball, youth football, soccer. As I said before, we even have a cricket field, lacrosse, and we've got a park with tennis courts, skateboarding, an ice rink, outdoor ice rink for the winter, basketball, and it's for a place that started off as a footnote in the Puritan church development here with the opposition to the reading of the Book of Sports. I can tell you that year-round, night and day, it seems that the Tewksbury, former Tewksbury Hospital property is used for sports. This gets us now back toward the Tewksbury Abbey. Tewksbury, Miko Kaufman is a wonderful guy who we all knew in the town, who passed away in 1924 to 2016. Miko grew up in Romania. He wanted to be a concert violinist, but he's left-handed, and you can't be a violinist in an orchestra if you're left-handed, so he turned to sculpture. I think he went through about the 6th or 8th grade or something like that, and then went to a art school, I forgot the name of it now, to perfect his abilities in art. He survived for 3 years as a prisoner of war in a Nazi concentration camp in Romania, and then came to the United States in 1961. He was the one who sculpted this Wamesett Indian to my left over here, which is prominently displayed out on the main street of this town to celebrate the Wamesett Indians. And he also, in celebrating the diversity of characters, race, and age outside the United Methodist Church here in Tewksbury, which was established in 1968, he has these four figures touching souls. They're different races, a couple different sexes, and they're all touching their feet. So Miko is a whimsical guy, and he said touching souls, well, we'll just use it as a pun. And folks who came from visiting, twinning here from Tewksbury, England, saw this sculpture and said, we would love to have one here. So a collection was raised, and Miko said, fine, you just have to pay for the casting of it and the transportation. And now the Tewksbury Abbey, which is a little older than the United Methodist Church, having been started at least in the year 1102, has this beautiful symbol of friendship between our two towns. And that's what I wanted to end on, that there's been a great spirit between the settlers and the Wamesets that kept us sort of safe from the other strifes of the King William's War, of the King Philip's War, and that we have this wonderful statue there to be enjoyed by I see about 200,000 people come there a year. Michael Taverner, the vicar of the Abbey, on September 12th in 1999, said in dedication that this welcomes visitors with its image of reconciliation and class, reconciliation and harmony, irrespective of class, color, or age. So I'd like to stop at this point and say that we're going to have some questions, I imagine, and now we'll turn this over to Robert Hayes, who is our director of our library's community outreach. Again, this is Doug Sears. Thank you very much for this opportunity to explain a little bit to our friends across the pond about our community. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much, Doug. Wonderful job. Thank you to Nancy for the introduction and for Brian for putting that all together for us. So Doug is here live with us. And Doug, I apologize if I stopped the video a few seconds early, but I think you might have had a slide at the end there, so I apologize. But we do have some comments and questions for you. So why don't we get right into it? Let's see. Christopher asks, he has two questions regarding Tewksbury on April 19th, 1775. Was Tewksbury folded into the Billerica companies? A Minuteman NHP says there are records of Billerica, Chelmsford, and Reading at Miriam's Corner, but not of Tewksbury separately. So why don't we start with that question? So are you familiar with Tewksbury on April 19th, 1775?
Not as much as my colleague on the Historical Society, Brian Cortez, and he would be the one I would direct that question to. I can't say specifically. I haven't studied those records, but I'm sure they exist, and that the person asking the question probably has some more knowledge on this than do I.
Another fun question from Christopher. Do you have any insight as to the identity of the Tewksbury writer who spread the alarm this direction? That name seems to be lost to history. And I know that the Tewksbury writer is on our town seal. So any ideas there, Doug?
No, I have heard that question asked many times, and people have given various favorite names to that person. The closest I know is that this person may have received from Paul Revere the word and was coming from the direction of Woburn toward Tewksbury, and I don't know more than that. However, it'd be nice for folks to latch onto that and come up with some better answer than I'm giving here.
Let's see, Rose asks, she missed where the statue of Anne Sullivan and Helen Keller is located.
That is on Main Street at the town hall. What's it, 2009 Main Street, and it's maintained where the garden club maintains it, and it's right there for all to see. The Indian is down by Vic's Waffle House, closer to Lowell. The Methodist Church is also on Main Street. I don't know the number, but that's toward Wilmington. And across from that, Miko also has as a South Fire Station. There's what they call the muster of firefighters going up a pole. So those are some of the public art that Miko has, and as well as interestingly, a mile from where the Hopkinton marathon begins, there is a sculpture that Miko made, which is also the same as the one he made for the marathons beginning in Greece. In Lowell, there's the Whistler sculpture at the Whistler House. There's the Mill Girls by the park, and many. He is as a European. He was familiar with the concept of public art and tried very hard in this country to revive that tradition. And we're very gifted in Tewksbury to have his art on public display.
Another question here. What is the origin of the Redmond moniker for the school sports teams? It's now seen as problematic by some, but I've always assumed the intent was to honor that heritage.
Well, I certainly know that the intent was never not to honor the heritage. People object these days to the word red. I did that in the 1950s. I don't like red now. A lot of people don't like the name men and all this stuff. But this was intended to honor the great relationship that we had with our Wamasett Native Americans. And I think it's quite unfortunate that people are trying to make their own agenda. This is just me speaking. So dishonoring our tradition by saying it's dishonoring something else. And the origin of it, I don't know, but presumably because it really fits, and we were. It was a place. It was really a place of honor that we had such, I'd say, happy, sort of happy relationship. I get a little bit tongue-tied because I feel this very strongly.
You're doing fine, Doug. So Rick asks, when I was a junior in high school, there was a rumor that Germany had Tewksbury on a list of priority targets. Is there any truth to this rumor?
Yes, it is not a rumor. I've read that. Also, Jay Gaffney and I at one point went up to the top of the administration building at the hospital, and there we could see, out across the countryside, and there were little models, about so big, of various types of planes that have a spotter up there. And if you saw a plane that looked like one of these specific planes, you were supposed to report it immediately, because the power grid that runs through the sort of the center of Tewksbury is still there, and it still continues to be a major source of transmitting electric power along the eastern coast of the United States.
Rick also asks, is the Tewksbury history book written by Patton available at the library? And I can speak to that. It is. I know we have circulating copies in the regular collection, and then we also have multiple copies in the local history room.
It's also,
Doug. Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
It is also online.
Yeah, good point, Doug. And I'll see if I can find that before we end the call. I might be able to put that in the chat. So Doug, I know that you were on the previous call today with John Dixon about the history of Tewksbury, England. Wondering if there was anything in that presentation that caught your attention. And can you speak a little bit more about the origins of Tewksbury, our Tewksbury, as it relates to Tewksbury, England?
I have read in numerous places that there's absolutely no connection between Tewksbury, Massachusetts and Tewksbury, England, with the extra E. People have made various suppositions that it was some Duke of Tewksbury, or this was the king's, nom de guerre or so when he was chasing the ladies or something like that. But this is not supported, I think, so far by the evidence. I really liked his presentation. He really liked the fact that we have so much land. They're pretty much constrained between the banks of the Avon and the Severn River, and that's how they are dealing with an historic town being brought rather brutally into the 21st century, and his affection for the old Tewksbury was really notable. I really much appreciated John Dixon's account.
Well, I don't see any additional comments or questions on either Zoom or Facebook, so I think this has been pretty painless for you, Doug. Doug, do you have any last words for the group?
The only last words are, I just hope this continues, that we continue these back and forth with Tewksbury, England. I'm looking forward to seeing the Stoneham et Tewksbury of Quebec. I would like to know more about Tewksbury Township in New Jersey. And of course, it would be exciting to know what people in Tasmania and South Africa are doing who name themselves Tewksbury. So I think this is a very worthwhile project. It's a fun little project. And I would like to encourage others to be involved, and I look forward to seeing the Tewksbury Library, the Tewksbury Historical Society involved over time, and hopefully, putting on the Tewksbury Historical Society hat that we, a small group of people like to have more, who will find their own little, personal stories that are personal to them. We encourage them to, the people in the town, to go and find them and perhaps join the society, and we can sort of be helpful. And is it really important to know where that you've been to determine where you might be going in the future. So please join the society and follow these programs as we go along. Thank you all.
Great. And in the chat, John Dixon mentioned that the link, if there's a link between Tewksbury, Massachusetts and Tewksbury, England, John suggests that King George III had a subsidiary title of Baron Tewksbury back in 1734. So I guess we still have to do some more research on that. Like Doug, I've seen suggestions that perhaps we're not named after Tewksbury, England. Apparently, Tewksbury, New Jersey is pretty convinced that they are named after Tewksbury, England. But who knows about us, Doug? We'll continue to do the research.
Might ask ask John whether he was the Duke of Tewksbury before he went mad or after he went mad.
Oh, there you go. Okay, well, we'll follow that up via email. And I put some information about the Tewksbury Historical Society in the chat. That's their Facebook page. And I believe their contact information is on their Facebook page. So anyway, want to thank Doug so much. Great job as always, Doug. Want to thank Nancy Reed, Brian Dorrington, Ann Careless, everyone else who was involved. Thank you to the 20 or so that were watching live on Zoom, and the hundreds, the thousands that are going to watch later on YouTube. So thank you so much, Doug, and I hope everyone has a great day. Have a good one. Bye-bye.